The Agra fort is built on the banks of the Yamuna. The battlements of it are like the hillocks. No calamity has ever befallen its fortification, nor has deceitful time dealt treacherously with it. So wrote the Ghaznavite poet Khwaja Masood about the Agra fort in the 11th century. The fort was won by Emperor Akbar in 1558. He made it his strategic stronghold. Since then, it held its position center stage in the dynamic historical saga of the Mughal dynasty. Emperor Akbar ordered the reconstruction of this fort in 1565. According to his court historian Abul Fazl, the citadel was to be stable, like the foundations of the dominion of the sublime family, and permanent, like the pillars of its fortunes. Agra occupied a central position in the plains of northern India. The fort was provided with 4 gates, whereby the doors of the dominion were opened towards the 4 quarters of the world. The first of these gates to be completed in 1568 was the monumental Delhi Gate. Linked to the mainland by a drawbridge, it was the most ingeniously planned gateway. Towering bastions protecting the fort gave the defendants the strategic advantage against the besiegers. A carefully devised entrance provided with sharp curves, a steep pathway, and high battlements made the fort impregnable. The inner entrance, called the Hatyapur, was not only invincible, but also aesthetically pleasing, with marble inlay patterns adorning it. Abul Fazl wrote, "From the foundations to the battlements, the fortress was composed of hewn stone, each of which was polished like the world-revealing mirror, and was ruddy as the cheek of fortune." The Amar Singh Gate was so named because Rao Amar Singh, who assassinated a minister of Shah Jahan's court, was caught and killed while attempting to escape from this gate. It too had a complex entrance, which is beautifully decorated. There are 3 gateways which lead to a steep ramp. It was used mainly as a private entrance by the residents of the fort. The massive red sandstone walls of the fort stand 70 feet in height, with double ramparts and broad circular bastions. Numerous turrets and battlements were conceived to make this most impenetrable fort of the times. The entire fort is surrounded by two deep moats. The inner dry moat, 30 feet wide, was built during Akbar's reign. It was extended to include another wet moat built under the orders of Aurangzeb. The only access to the river was through the Khaziri Gate, also known as the Water Gate. It was here that the Maratha warrior Shivaji was imprisoned by Aurangzeb. Using his ingenuity, he escaped hidden inside a basket of sweetmeats through the Delhi Gate. Stretching 1.5 miles in circumference, the fort was completed in 8 years under the faithful superintendence of Qasim Khan. Akbar favored the southeastern side of the fort for his palaces. This presented a pleasing view overlooking the river. The emperor's palace, called the Bengali Mahal, was built along the eastern wall and is the oldest standing construction in the fort today. Its ruined walls are a mute testimony to the glorious era ushered in by Akbar. The flat-roofed buildings of the palace were made entirely of red sandstone. Adjoining it is the palace occupied by the heir apparent Prince Jahangir. Built of red sandstone and inlaid with marble, it is embellished with extremely graceful carving. The outer walls of the palace are similarly inlaid with elephant motifs. An ornamental garden is laid in front of its entrance, in the Mughal tradition of the Chahar Bagh. With the death of Akbar in 1605, Jahangir ascended the throne at Agra and ruled along with his Persian queen, Noor Jahan. Within the palace complex, spacious and profusely carved halls open into a large central courtyard. The assembly hall is exquisitely designed in the Gujarati tradition. Serpentine struts emerging out of elephants' mouths are reminiscent of the Hindu makaras. Birds, like the parrot and the hamsa, are carved, perched in the struts and brackets supporting the roofs of this complex. Another hall, built on the opposite side of the courtyard, has a unique design of cooling the interiors. Cool air was blown into the chamber through perforated screens, which ran around 3 sides. This grand hall still reflects some of the glory of the past. Its painted surfaces and azure walls, with the swastika motif, speaks of the artistic genius which guided the construction of the fort. Some beautiful remnants of the original gilded paintings still remain. The walls of the courtyard beyond are richly carved, imbuing every aspect of the palace complex with a sense of beauty. The buildings of the fort are built entirely of red sandstone, intricately carved with Hindu decorative motifs. They reflect the secular mind of Akbar, who created a unique architectural style. He replaced the vaulted and arched ceilings of Islamic inspiration with the horizontal style of construction of the Hindus. The ornamentation, too, echoes Hindu forms. Ferguson observes, every feature around is indeed of pure Hindu architecture. Indeed, throughout this fort, Hindu forms and construction prevail. The Mughals, who came from the cold climates of Iran and Afghanistan, found the heat and dust of the Indian plains daunting. To cool them, the palaces in the fort have many beautifully designed water channels leading to gracious fountains. On the terrace of the palace building is the Mayur Mandap. Here, peacocks adorn the brackets. It seems to be like a Hindu temple dedicated to the god Kartikeya, who rides on the peacock. The lotus blooms on every beam in this mandap. The terrace of the Mahal has many other beautiful flat-roofed pavilions. The most prominent amongst all the palace complexes is that of Emperor Shah Jahan. The Khas Mahal is one of these elegant buildings made of pure marble. It is set in a beautiful garden called the Anguri Bagh. Surrounding it are the richly carved balconies of the harem. The Khas Mahal, which was his personal palace, flanked by those of his daughters Roshanara and Jahanara Begum, is one of the many buildings shaped by his genius. Abul Fazl mentions that there were more than 500 buildings and pavilions built to the designs of Bengal and Gujarat. But Shah Jahan, who had an innate passion for building, had many of them demolished to create the beautiful white marble pavilions we see today. Fountains, water channels, waterfalls, tanks, and the Anguri Bagh, which spread before the Khas Mahal, made this an enchanting residence for the royal family. The palace is finely decorated with rich paintings on the white marble surfaces. Shah Jahan's passion for beauty and for the luminous effects of white marble is seen everywhere here. Indeed, this royal complex is one of the most elegant and graceful residences of the Mughal era. The Musamman Burj is the earliest of the marble structures. The Burj, or tower, projects out in a circular bastion high on the riverside wall of the fort. The pristine beauty of the marble walls of this chamber is further enhanced with the colors of the flowers inlaid in them. This is an art which was perfected in India by Noor Jahan. In the inner courtyard is an elegant and profusely ornamented fountain. In the last years of his life, Shah Jahan was confined to this Burj by his son Aurangzeb. From here, the imprisoned emperor gazed at the Taj Mahal, where his beloved queen lay buried. He died in full view of the Taj, where he wished his mortal remains to mingle with those of Mumtaz Mahal. The Machi Bhavan, built by Shah Jahan, was originally a water palace with lily ponds, water channels, and fountains arranged in the central courtyard. The southern corridor of this palace has beautifully chiseled marble pillars and the finest stucco work on its domed ceiling. The corridor leads to a spacious terrace, on the right of which stands the elegant Dewan-e-Khas, which was constructed in 1635. The hall for the audience has exquisite inlay patterns outlining the white marble flowers of the dado panels. There are double pillars decorated in a similar manner. The famous peacock throne was placed on a carved black marble slab in front of the Diwan-e Khas. The small and private Meena Masjid is also attached to the Diwan-e Khas. In the northwestern corner of the Machi Bhavan is the Nagina Masjid. This was for the use of the emperor and his harem. It is refined and graceful with bulbous domes and lotus petals. The edges of the arched ceiling of this marble masjid were once beautifully gilded. The Meena Bazaar, where, as legend has it, Shah Jahan first met Mumtaz Mahal. In 1648, Shah Jahan ordered the construction of the imposing Moti Masjid. As a poet exclaimed, "It is a palatial building of paradise. There is no place of worship like it, resplendent and brilliant." Set in a large garden is the most awe-inspiring building of the fort, the Diwan-e-Aam. It has a pillared hall for the audience who came before the emperor. The emperor sat on a throne in a specially constructed pavilion. The walls, ceilings, and pillars of this room are entirely covered with exquisite inlay work, reminiscent of the Taj Mahal. Semi-precious stones of different colors were used to create the splendid decoration of many hued flowers. This exquisite art of Parchinkari reached its high point during the reign of Shah Jahan. This grand building, made of pure white marble, has 64 pillars connected with beautiful arches. It was within this splendid hall that the wedding ceremony of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal was solemnized. Indeed, for 101 years, this great fort was witness to the pomp and splendor of the Mughal Empire.
Sa
The reign of Emperor Shah Jahan ended with his death in 1658. With it ended a glorious chapter in the history of this fort, a history which began when Emperor Akbar ordered it to be built, to be worthy of the dignity of his dominion.